those at the end. And we are excited to be able to address any questions that you all have. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jenny Wolf to talk a little bit more about today's presentation.
Hi there, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am Jenny Wolf. I am on the board of trustees to the Florida Trust for Historic Preservation and the chairperson of the committee on our Hurricane Recovery Group. And that is who is bringing you this session today. So we're glad that you're with us. What I wanted to point out to you is that there are many ways that you can get involved with the Florida Trust. If you're not familiar already with us, visit our website, check our social media, become a member so that you can get emails already sent to you and invitations to these types of sessions. But the other thing that you may not be aware of is we have regional councils all across the state. So there is a volunteer ambassador in your community that if you have a particular issue that you want to address or you don't know where to go within the Florida Trust and want someone closer to you, feel free to reach out to them. So our work today that we're going to do is share with you some of the ways that we assess damage following a storm event and bring some of our experts together, those that you see there, to provide you with some technical resources and let you know that what we do is try to listen and try to understand what your challenges are so that we can potentially convey them to the Division of Historical Resources or the National Trust for Historic Preservation, where there might be other resources that are needed. So we're going to talk to you about several topics today. And the first thing that I want to point out is that none of these are a life jacket. Every situation is different. But what we do know is that floods and storms are going to continue. And we want you to know that as you prepare in advance or whether you're picking up the pieces, we appreciate that it can be overwhelming in any circumstance. So we're going to shed some light on specific topics from cemeteries to building assessments to museum properties and to grants and how you can just learn a little bit of information, hopefully have some questions for us at the end. So the first speaker that we're going to have for us, one more thing that we want to show is some of the recent work that we've done is in St. Petersburg. This year, our group did not go out and do major damage assessments because of the back-to-back hurricanes. So we are providing more of a technical resource. And that's what we did a couple weeks ago at the Polish American Society, where we had a group of us there. And thanks to Tom Schofield and Manny Preserve the Berg, they were there with us so that we could provide the Polish American Society some information on how to recover from the flooding damage that they experienced and also some grant opportunities. So kind of what we're going to be sharing with you today. So we're going to kick it off right now with our first presentation, Planning Ahead of the Storm for Museum Properties. And that's going to be discussed by Mike Cosden, who you've already met as our board president. And he is also a part of the team at the Edison Ford Estates down in Fort Myers. Take it away.
Perfect. Thank you, Jenny. So yeah, as Jenny said, I serve, in addition to on the board of the Florida Trust, I serve as the Chief Operating Officer for the Edison and Ford Winter Estates here in Fort Myers. And we are about a 20-acre historic property. I'm going to share a little bit of what we did to prepare a hurricane plan and how it impacted our site. And I hope some of those insights will work for others that have historic properties, whether it's a historic museum like we have, a historic house, or historic landscape, one historic structure, neighborhood, whatever. So I'm going to go over a little bit of the 3 phases of planning that we use that were effective for us. And then I want to talk about just a couple of key common failure points where that planning process doesn't work as well as it should, at least in our experience. So hopefully some of the issues we've had in the past will serve as lessons for others. So the first phase of this planning process that worked for us was actually creating, or in some cases revising, an earlier document. But I think the most important thing when you're first thinking about hurricane planning and how you're going to actually prep for a storm is to consider a realistic worst case scenario, not to start on a downer. But I think that's the most important thing that you can do. And that was a failure point that we saw when we were planning, when we were writing our hurricane plan prior to seeing the impacts of Hurricane Ian in Southwest Florida, which made landfall not far from here. We looked at about 120 years of history that we had of people living on our property, recorded history in Fort Myers of hurricanes, and we said we'll plan for the worst thing that we've seen in that time frame. And that was not enough to plan for the way that Hurricane Ian impacted us. So that's the first failure point I want to mention is not planning for as serious a storm as you could actually face. You can look at recorded history, but we're never going to be able to plan for every storm. So consider that your site is completely unique that you're trying to prepare, and also every storm is completely unique. And when I say that, you have to consider the details of your site. In ours, we have almost 20 buildings, many of which are historic. We have a combination of wooden structures as well as poured concrete, very different methods to prep for each of those, which I will not go into, but consider materials, consider the built environment around you, consider if you're looking at storm surge as a possible cause of damage versus flash flooding, in other words, salt versus fresh water, because you're planning on your preparation and your planning will vary greatly based on those. Every storm is also going to be different. So you have to consider obviously meteorological things, but also tides and then changes in your built environment, all of those things. So after you've considered what scenario you're planning for, which I think should be the worst case that you could realistically see, the first thing I think you should do is work with stakeholders, which could be, depending on the size of your organization, your board, if you have staff, if you have volunteers, but everyone has contractors that they would work with in the event of preparing for a storm or the aftermath that you should be consulting with. You've got local or county or state government that you can be working with. In our case, we coordinate with our local emergency operations center and our city government, as well as our county government, to make sure we all are working hand in hand. And then you have neighboring properties, almost certainly. In our case, we have things like a commercial restaurant and a church right next door to us that we need to work with to make sure that we know we're all on the same page, especially when it comes to the aftermath of a storm. Where are you going to be staging things? Where are contractors going to enter your site? Do they need to work through other properties? Those are all things to be considered. So then you need to consider the material preparations that you'll do for your site. Obviously, you might think of things like shuttering windows. In our case, we were able to come up with a plan where we can shutter a significant portion of the windows on our site every year at the beginning of hurricane season so that we can respond much more quickly to shutter the last few critical things if there's actually a storm approaching. You can obviously use things like sandbags or alternatives to sandbags, like gel-filled items like that. If you're not dealing with salt water, those can be very effective. You can consider flood dams, window and door barriers. But again, it's going to entirely depend on your structures, whether you're dealing with a wooden structure or a concrete structure and how high they are above sea level and above the floodplain there. And you can look at berms and other mitigation and things like that that could be a more long-term strategy. Both seawalls, all those things. But I think the more important thing is to consider in your hurricane plan that you have a plan for after a storm, because this is another kind of failure point that I see for folks not considering the kit that they'll need to recover from a storm. So I mentioned you need to have a plan with your stakeholders. They all need to know what to do, which I'll talk about in a minute, but you also need to prep that kit. It could include things to dry your property like fans, dehumidifiers. It could include ways to document damage, which are very important. In our case, we have a huge historic landscape. So a lot of our hurricane kit is things like stakes, webbing to hold up trees that have been downed. It should include tarps, all of those things. So I think that's another failure point to consider. Does your plan have materials to prep for the storm as well as to deal with the aftermath of the storm? So you make your plan. The most important thing to do next is to train your plan. That includes all of those stakeholders that I just mentioned. In our case, we do a yearly training with all of our staff to make sure we're refreshed on our plan. And I think you should be doing that whether you're working with volunteers, your board, a small group of people that are concerned about a historic property or neighborhood, government officials, all of that. The last piece of this that needs to be considered is revision, because your plan needs to be revised regularly. It's not a static document that will live forever and be useful forever. You need to be looking at not only your own experiences, which I can speak for our site. We've updated our plan. I've been at our site for 13 years, and we've updated it probably half a dozen times. You can look at your own experiences with your site after a storm, but I think another key thing to do is be aware throughout the state, certainly your area, of how other properties are being impacted by storms. And it may not even just be historic properties. In our site, we've learned a lot from small businesses in our downtown area that are dealing with the same flood conditions we are, about how they've been able to protect their structures from storm surge and also from freshwater surge. So I think revising your plan is another failure point, the last one that I'll mention, and something that you need to consider. So to recap here, I know that was a lot of information, but I think it's very important to have a written plan for how you are going to respond to a storm, whether you're a museum, historic site around the state. And I think you need to make your plan, consider what a realistic worst case could be, and plan for that. Train any key stakeholders on how that plan will work in reality, and then continually revise your plan so that you can be as prepared as you possibly can. And I want to reiterate before we move along with our presentation that if you have any questions or comments, things you'd like to talk more about, you can drop those in the chat and we will address them at the end of this call. So I hope this is helpful for historic sites around the state. And I'm going to turn it back over to Jenny to introduce our next speaker.
Thank you, Mike. You did a great job packing a lot of information in that short time. So we know to look to the Edison Ford Estates for some other resources, and we thank you for that. Next, we're going to hear from JJ Scott. He is also on our board of trustees, but he is also on the board of the Florida AIA, and he is a practicing architect. So he brings a lot of information from his experience. And he also did this great video for us, which I think is somewhere still on our YouTube channel, of reviewing a property for potential maintenance issues. And so that's might be some of the things that he'll touch on today. So JJ, take it away.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is JJ Scott. I'm president and principal architect of MLD Architects here in Tallahassee, Florida. I am also certified safety assessment program through the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services. So I've done quite a bit of training on various ways to go and assess structures in different ways, not to mention historic structures. So hopefully I can help shed a little light on some more important bullet points that you might want to take a look at whenever you go back to your historic structure to make sure that it's in good shape and able to be occupied. So the first thing I want to do is a quick exterior assessment. We want to go top to bottom, outside to in. We want to make sure that the thing is watertight and that it is not structurally compromised in any way. So what we want to do first is do a quick walk around of the entire exterior. We want to make sure that there's no trees or power poles or any sort of debris or anything on the exterior that may be penetrating the actual envelope of the building. That we know right offhanded is going to be a major issue that we need to tackle immediately and could be damaging the structure further. Once we figure that out, we do a quick look around on the, from the ground. Don't try to get up on the building with a ladder or anything like that. Look up at the roof and see if there is that a tree falling or anything like that. If we're clear, we move on to anything that's penetrating or harming the building. So if this is a flood situation, it could be something that has washed up onto the front porch and busted out a wall or busted out a window. It could be any number of things that could have penetrated that building envelope. Again, things that would be causing further damage, not to mention that now that the storm event is over, if there's an additional, as you know, it usually is followed up by more rain. We want to protect that and make sure that that doesn't cause additional damage. We also want to take a look at columns and chimneys. If you notice that your columns are displaced or leaning, or even the structure, if you step back and take a look across the front elevation of your structure and notice that it has leaned, that wasn't there before, you definitely want to take note of that and try to diagnose why that is what it is, especially if there's a storm surge event or a flood event. It could have been, your foundations could just simply be, as a historic structure, bricks sitting on the ground. There's generally a lot of times that even in some cases they're wood sitting on the ground. So you got to be careful of that and make sure that none of those foundations have been displaced, and that it is safe to continue further. Your utility impacts. You want to take a really quick look and make sure that sometimes, if a tree falls on the power line that's connected to the building, if it's not an underground utility, it can get yanked out of the wall and yank your service completely out, or have impacts to short that was to cause circuits to short inside the building. You want to make sure that you do your best to either go to the main and shut that electricity off so that it doesn't, if they re-energize the building, it doesn't start a fire. Several things like that to take a quick look at, because as you know, if it's a wood frame structure, it'll go up and go up fast before anybody has any chance to even try to control it at all. So make sure that you take a look at those utility impacts, your electricity, your gas. If there's gas to the building, make sure you get that shut off. You never know what might have happened, especially if you did see anything shift. You never know what might have happened or gotten broken or pinched or something like that. Water, the same thing. If your water's on, shut it off. Go back, take a look, make sure we can systematically turn all of those things back on and check it. But first of all, we need to make sure that it's safe and secure immediately. Then we start to go to the interior. We look at ceilings and exterior walls. That's the biggest two things. Make sure you don't have roof leaks. Make sure you don't have windows leaking. Take a look at the plaster in your house and make sure that there's no plaster cracking. That may be an indication of movement in the building. So you may want to take note of that and make sure that there's all that is at least minimal. Again, kind of like I said before, go ahead and shut your systems off. Shut your AC off. Shut your all your breaker boxes off, and then we'll go back once it's re-energized. We can go back and systematically turn those back on and make sure that there's no shorts. We don't smell anything. Nothing like that is being silly and causing additional damage to the building. Then we can start our mitigation process. Again, top to bottom, outside in. We want to get the roof repaired. We want to get windows fixed. We want to get the exterior siding in, make sure everything is good and dry. And then we go inside and start worrying about finishes. If we need to board up a window, go ahead and get that boarded up. If we need tarping to the roof or anything like that temporarily before we can get the roof repaired properly, take a look at your chimney and make sure it hadn't been, because some of those chimneys get pretty tall and they're fairly skinny. Sometimes those can get knocked over or displaced and start leaning, or various forms of damage on chimneys. The bottom line is, for me, is that maintenance is your best preparation for storm. You need to take advantage of some of your architectural features. If you have shutters, you can reinforce those shutters and have them ready to be shut and actual function as some hurricane protection for you. But there are other things like, going ahead and getting your house sort of prepared in that you've already cut sheets to board the windows with, or there are products like Armor Screen and things like that that can do large areas of porches, Florida rooms, large expanses of glass. It can protect all of those. So I would definitely look into those. But again, maintenance is your best friend as far as storm preparation goes, as far as your historic home or your historic property. And I think I touched on a lot of things and I did it very fast. So obviously, if there's any questions, throw them out in the chat. We'll get them answered for you, either through an email, or you can call me, or we'll let you talk those things through with staff there, and we can get you an answer absolutely as quick as possible.
Thank you, JJ. And one of the things that we were showing while you were talking is sharing the form that we use as our team goes out and about across the state, wherever, usually after a storm event. And it's a one-pager form. And so it kind of goes through that top-down outside approach to looking at potential areas of damage for a historic building. So that's available. And we usually go out if there's been a significant place that's in a hard to get to area or an area lacking resources. People like JJ are on our team to help us do that. So thank you very much. Next up, we're going to talk with Rick Gonzalez, and he's going to take us to thinking about longer term plans. He is also on the, well, he's a trustee emeritus of the Florida Trust for Historic Preservation, also on the national level advisory council of historic properties, and he's also on the Florida Historical Commission. It's Rick. Oh, you're muted. Sorry. Try again.
How about that? Okay, good afternoon, Jenny, and everybody else out there, preservationist-minded Floridians. Hoping you're having a great Thanksgiving week. Glad that we're doing this session with so many esteemed friends, Ruben and JJ and Mike. I'd like to share, well, I've been in the business for almost 40 years. Next May will be beginning my 40th year in preservation and architecture. I'm located in West Palm Beach, but we work statewide. We have projects all over the state, and a lot of them historic. And I want to share a couple of things that you can do with your buildings, short-term, long-term, beforehand, and afterwards. I appreciate Mike and JJ's comments. They're excellent. Some of them I had in mind, but I'll try to spin mine a little bit different than from what they were sharing. So in terms of priorities, JJ said from the top down. I like to switch that around. I like to say from the bottom up. And why I say that is because we've been running into issues with buildings with foundations, and you know what they say, if you don't have a strong foundation, the rest of your building is in danger, right? So dealing with foundations, for example, the House of Refuge, which is on the photo here on the bottom left, the oldest building in Martin County, and the other building is the Bank of Everglades down in Everglades City. The Bank of Everglades is at 3 feet above sea level. The new standards from FEMA, which I find to be ridiculous, you have to put your new buildings at 12 feet above sea level. So obviously we're not going to raise the building 9 feet. That would be ridiculous. That would be coastal Mississippi. And if any of you have been to coastal Mississippi, you don't want Florida to look like coastal Mississippi. It really is sad what they've done in Mississippi. So one of the things that we've done is we're using new products in the market. There's a web page that you can look up. It's called floodproofing.com. They give a seminar. So if you have a group of friends or a business, they'll come and give you a personal seminar on all of their products. And their products range from protecting a simple window to an entire neighborhood. They're doing right now Charleston, the waterfront of Charleston, with some permanent glass protection devices along the seawall, and they'll do property, so you can protect your property, or you can come in as tight as your front doors and your windows, and not have to do other things. At Everglades Bank, we've added some vents. We have flood vents and louvers, both in the base, in the attic area on the bottom, in the bottom, and also on the first floor. And the owner has acknowledged that the building might get wet. And so there are some things that you can do, wood floors, terrazzo floors, floors that can be easily cleaned after a storm. Of course, plaster. JJ mentioned plaster. I hate drywall. I don't think we should be using drywall in historic buildings, because it gets wet and it gets moldy and you have to rip it out, and it doesn't make any sense. So and also raising electric, and air conditioning units and all sorts of elements, so they're above quite a bit above the building floor. So got to think about that. Foundations, the exterior envelope, absolutely. The next step I'd say would be the roof, and then the exterior perimeter of the walls, right? How are we protecting the walls? What kind of finish? Is it a wood siding or is it a stucco siding? All of that determines the issues. And of course, your windows and doors, we know that there are ways of strengthening windows now. You can keep your historic windows and may perhaps change the glass to a thicker glass if you have enough of a bite there in your window to do that. If not, there are different type of panel systems and screen systems that you can use to protect your building. Can I get the next slide, Jenny? Long-term recovery, what should be first, right? Second and third, right? So obviously to me, like JJ was saying, if it's tipping over or if that chimney is leaning, there are some big issues that you need to deal with. Having a good structural partner, the first thing we do when we do our historic resources report, we actually hire 2 teams. We hire a scanning company to help us scan the entire building, and then we hire a structural MEP engineer that'll come in and look at the systems of the building. At the House of Refuge, we discovered that the foundations were in very bad shape. It's on a very tight sliver of land, and therefore the state grants that we had for a roof repair, right, Ruben? We had to change that money from roof repair to address the foundations. And then Martin County is now looking for additional money from their money sources to do the roof repair and the chimney repair. So sometimes you have to go and deal with the emergency situations first before you do other areas. So envelope always is the first priority, especially the roof, right? Because if you have a leak in the roof, you're going to get water, and and water is the worst element in the state of Florida, whether it comes from the wind or whether it comes from flooding. Water is the worst thing that we can deal with. What about the cost, right? Can you do things with cash? Yeah, sometimes, during emergencies, Hurricane Andrew or major hurricanes, there's a way to get a roofer or a carpenter, but you got to be careful. You've got to make sure that they're licensed, that they have a license in the state of Florida, that they know what they're doing. And nowadays, right, we didn't have access to the internet back in 1992. You can do a quick research on the internet to see if XYZ roofing company is really a legit company. I remember after Hurricane Michael, I did an evaluation of Mariana up in the Panhandle. They were using 5B metal roofing for facades. It was like just screw a metal facade. There was a lot of crazy stuff going on, right, Ruben? Remember, we were very concerned about that, because people just showed up out of the woodworks, and people would hire anybody just to waterproof their buildings, So you got to be careful with that, and having good insurance. Another point, my son Ricardo used to work for the counter insurance, the people that do the adjustment. They're called public adjustment. Highly recommend you hire a public adjuster. He will fight the insurance companies and usually get you double, triple of what the insurance company is offering you. They're all over the state. So the first thing you call before your insurance company is get yourself a good public adjuster. It's like getting a good lawyer and allowing you to do that work. Doing line item estimates for the repairs. That's difficult. That's doable. How can you phase repairs? Yes, you can do that. We're doing that at both the Everglades and at the House of Refuge. We don't have enough money to do all of the Everglades, so we're demolishing a poor addition on the backside. We're doing the foundations, and then we're going to close the envelope. I think that's always the most important thing. Even if it means putting plywood in the window openings and the door openings, just do that. On the Everglades, the back elevation is going to put plywood and some felt and just keep it watertight until we raise enough monies to do the elevator and the addition on the backside. Next slide, please. And then strategies for long-term recovery. Look, we've done a lot of historic resources report. And in fact, the one that we did for the House of Refuge came in #1 several years ago. And they're very important because you can do so many things with these reports. For example, you're a nonprofit. I'll never forget the Green Gables House, a very active group in Melbourne. They just found enough money to buy the property, but they're stuck, right? They're starting to learn and raise money. There's the coast people that live on the coast. So the report with the renderings and the drawings helps them raise money, right? So having a good report will help you raise the money that you need on the private side so that you can then go and ask for a grant from the Historical Commission. We just raised the grants from $500,000 to $1 million, okay? So we just had our first successful run at the $1 million situation, and we're hoping we're going to get it funded. We hope all of you out there will contact your legislators because we want to make sure we get it funded. We got 17 million in grants. We've only gotten 9 million approved the last couple of years. We want to get $17 million approved in 2025, but it's going to take everybody's help out there. So the report also starts to help you in terms of telling you, okay, what needs to be fixed, what kind of repairs you need to do, and also your systems, your structural systems, your foundation, the electrical. We're doing one building, my God, this one over here, the New Moon Lodge in Crescent City. Pretty old building. It was an African-American lodge, but it has been neglected. A tree fell on it. You can't see it. This is the front elevation, but on the backside, a tree fell on it. And so the tree's been removed, and there's a serious amount of damage on the backside from the foundations to the balconies and so forth. So reports helps you to analyze that and deal with the city. The city managers like that because now they can also address it immediately, and the reports really can help you do that. So I hope this has been helpful, and I look forward to your questions at the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Rick. You covered a lot of topics, and I think one of the most important tips is definitely making sure your contractor is licensed. That's ground one, rule number one. We're going to switch gears a little bit here and talk about cemeteries. You're going to hear from Melissa Wiley, who is our CEO and president of the organization. And she also has a new blog that she's been doing, morning coffee in a cemetery. So I know this is something that she has special interest in. So Melissa, what have you got to share with us?
Awesome. Thank you, Jenny. Welcome, everybody. I did want to take just a quick break and remind everyone of another historic resource that is important to plan for as we're thinking through our hurricane planning process, and that's our historic cemeteries. This picture is the Key West Cemetery in Key West. So obviously they have their own challenges that they need to work through with this beautiful historic resource. But definitely if you want to go to the next slide. Our state is a very
That is all we have.
oh, well, hold on. If everybody could, no, that's okay. If everyone would just give me 1 second, I'll share my screen. Because I know nobody wants to go without looking at pictures of historic cemeteries. I won't do that to you. All right, so here are some of the outdoor museums that we have in the state of Florida. So we're a big geographically dispersed state with a lot of different kinds of museums and stories to be told, and they all have their own unique challenges. So here you can see cemeteries from St. Augustine to Pensacola to Apalachicola. We saw Key West here in Tallahassee, and you can see the middle of the state is represented. You can see the challenges that are kind of inherent in historic cemeteries. The picture on the top right there is someone who worked to fix a historic monument, and they didn't use the appropriate kind of materials to do that work. So it is a very challenging space to be in, kind of on a good day. And when you start to factor in the impact of storms to that, it becomes even more challenging. So the first thing I want to just remind everyone when you're thinking of your historic, well, two things. Number one thing for your historic resources is to plan ahead, and that goes double for historic cemeteries in my mind. And the second thing is to be safe. So we all love our historic cemeteries, and the first thing we want to do is see how well they've fared after we get through these storms. But please be mindful of, staying off the streets when you need to, and assess the situation in the cemetery, and don't enter if there is likely to be dangers there. We can all trust that we're going to make the right decisions on that. And where we're going to go plan ahead for our storms, some important resources that you can use to keep in mind how to do that planning piece. I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but keep in your back pocket, Maxine, if you could share these. FPAN, they have offices throughout the state that they can help you with this work. The Historic Preservation Toolkit, which we will share later, has wonderful resources for you as well. And the Division of Historical Resources, of course, now has their historic cemetery program as well. So this is just going to be just a very quick overview. I only have like 1 minute and 45 seconds left, but when we get done, you can go back to those resources and learn more. So I kind of broke down this big project of working to restore our historic cemeteries in 3 chunks. The first is to record what you have. So take current photos of your resources, maybe broad photos of the overall kind of scope of the landscape, and then close-up photos of any monuments or markers that you might have. Do inventories of everything that you are aware of that is in the site. And then a great next step is to make sure that your historic cemetery is included on the Florida Master Site file to make sure that it is there for future generations and all planning that goes on in your community. Your next big bucket that we're going to look at is planning. We talked about some resources that can work there, but also as you get regular rainfall in your historic cemetery, look and see how that water flows. Observe how that happens and how you could mitigate that. This is a historic cemetery in Tampa, and you can see that they have some fencing around their cemetery, and they also use sandbags there as a resource for them. Also, a great thing that you can do in the planning phase is to maintain your trees, pruning trees, being mindful of any dead branches. All of those things can be really helpful in maintaining the health of the trees that are in your cemetery, and also mitigate any risk from falling branches that are maybe dead and don't need to be there in the first place. Third, another thing you can do is to assess the markers in your cemetery and determine which of them are the most delicate and prioritize any stabilizing work that you may need to get done or have on deck to get done with those first. Finally, and the last thing I'm going to mention in the planning bucket is to make sure that you have pre-established, oh, my timer went off, pre-established contacts that you're going to use when the storm's over, so you know who to reach out to. You can make sure that they are reputable and they know your resource in advance, and then have your supplies ready. And then the third recover piece is, again, to be safe, to document the impact. So you could have your before pictures and your after pictures to implement the plans that you have in place. And finally, keep in mind, there are a lot of grants out there that can help you with your recovery. And then finally, I was just going to take an extra 30 seconds and show from Tampa Oaklawn Cemetery these resources. There were many that were impacted in Tampa, but this is just one that was hit by Helene and Milton. And this is an urban cemetery very close to Tampa's downtown corridor. And the pictures on the left are courtesy of the Good Cemeterian, which is a wonderful resource that you can look and see how you can maintain historic places. But you can see there was a lot of trees down, branches down impact to the cemetery after the hurricanes there. And then the pictures to the right are pictures that I took when we were there just a few weeks ago for our board meeting. So you can see they had a plan in place and they got all of this debris out of the way. And there was very little impact on the long-term impact on the cemetery itself. This marker here on the right is the same marker you can kind of see hidden away through the branches there. So unfortunately, this is a ongoing story that we're going to see throughout the state of Florida, but we can work to mitigate damage from storms. So sorry, Jenny, I went 45 seconds long on that one.
Well, thank you, Melissa. I appreciate you delving into the underworlds of cemeteries, because it also reminded me that a part of our work is to talk about the knowledge base of basically the knowledge base of the resources that are there and how that's disappearing. And that is something that we also have to keenly work to make sure is considered. It's not just the physical buildings and sticks and stones. So thank you for that. For the rest of you, I want to point out we have 20 minutes left total in our presentation. So we're going to move quickly through this last piece, and then we're going to be on to discussion. So just hang in there with us for a few more minutes. First, we're going to have Daphne. She's our membership coordinator at the Florida Trust, and she is going to talk about the 11 to Save program.
Sorry, I was muted. Hi, everyone. You may have seen me before in previous Lunch and Learn. Glad to have you all here. If you're familiar with the Florida Trust, you're probably also familiar with our 11 to Save program. It's my personal favorite. It's designed to raise awareness for endangered resources throughout the state. And those resources are brought to our 11 to Save committee's attention by general public. Anyone can submit a nomination throughout the year. The deadline for a resource to be considered for a particular year is May, and usually May 15th. Our 11 to Save committee then reviews the sites and selects 11 of them to highlight every year and announces them during Preservation of Main Street, which is our annual conference. This program has been going on for many, many years now, and it has been successful. Of course, we've not been able to save all of the 11 to save, but there are great, great successes. But in the last few years, we also wanted to do something even more tangible and give funding to some of those 11 to save resources. And preservationists from throughout Florida and beyond helped us raise money, raise a seed fund that we used to create the 11 to Save Grant Fund. This fund is available to 11 to Save resources that were either listed during the last year or previous year. It doesn't matter, as long as you are on the 11 to Save list, you can apply for it. And it can then help a nonprofit organization, public agencies, state colleges, or school districts with funding requests to help stave off threats against those 11 to Save resources. Our grant fund applications usually open in September or October each year. The committee reviews those applications in November, and funds are usually released very, very quickly by December in the same year. So I know we don't have a lot of time, but I do encourage you to go on our website and read our frequently asked questions in our 11 to Save Grant Fund Guide for details about what type of projects those funds cover and how to apply. And just a few short tips for you when you do apply to the program is make sure you know the deadline. And speaking of that, please sign up for our newsletter, which you can also find on our website, because then you will be informed of upcoming deadlines and when to apply for what program. As I mentioned, read the guide, please, 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 and reach out to staff. We are so happy to help. You can either find us through email, and I can share my email as well, or just call our office. We will be super happy to respond to any of your questions you have about the application or the 11 to Save program itself, and help you complete it. So I'm going to give the mic back to Jenny, because I know we're running low on time, but thank you so much for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Daphne. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ruben Acosta. He is the Deputy Director of our State Historic Preservation Office, and he is also was part of the National Register program, but he oversees a lot of that now, as well as the grants programs. So he's going to share with you some of the resources available at the state level. Thanks, Ruben.
Thank you, Jenny. So my name is Ruben Acosta. I am Bureau Chief for Historic Preservation and Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer at the Division of Historical Resources. And what I'm going to focus on real quick today is our grants program. So there's been a lot of really good information about what you can or what you should be doing in preparation for a disaster or recommended actions afterwards. A lot of those activities the foundations for them can be set through our grants program. So we help pay for a lot of these activities. We have 3 major programs: our small matching grant program. These are 1-year-long projects up to $50,000 in grant funds. Depending on your organization or where you are located, you may have your match requirements waived. Otherwise, it's like a 50% match or something. There's a match requirement. Special category, those are big projects, 2-year-long projects that can be funded up to $1 million. This is all of our development projects, work on actual buildings and stuff, fixed capital outlays and things like that. And then finally, there's our Abandoned African American Cemeteries Grant Program. It's our newest program. It's the one that probably has the least application in this specific circumstance. So I'm going to focus on the first 2. So next slide, please. So our small matching program, like I said, 1-year-long program, and there goes the match requirement there, 1-to-1 match. This is the program that I highly recommend if you have a property that you need to come up with that plan, like Mike mentioned, or you want to get that historic resource report, like Rick's mentioned in his presentation. Those are the types of things that we pay for using the small matching grants program. We also do historic resource surveys. So in order to have a plan, you need to know what you are protecting. And that's what the survey answers. It provides you the baseline information necessary for you to effectively prepare for a disaster. You can use these to help come up with those disaster plans, to do historic designations and various other items. I highly recommend if you are applying for these types of projects, you should really contact us early, as soon as you start thinking about what you want to apply for, before our application period even opens. So applications go from April 1st to June 1st. That way we can provide you advice on what makes a good grant application, and also make sure that you have all of the required materials that you would need to submit to the grant staff. For example, if you're looking for a historic designation, you need to, before you even apply for the grant, have a letter from our office that says that your property is even eligible for a historic designation. Note that these grants are for nonprofit organizations or arms of local or state government. It's not for private property owners. So that's one of the limitations of our program. However, if you are an individual that owns private property, it's entirely possible for you to partner with someone, maybe your neighbors, you have a neighborhood organization or something that's a nonprofit. They could apply for a grant and do a survey of your neighborhood, or come up with a, preservation plan or disaster response plan that they can then put into effect, especially if you're in a vulnerable area with a lot of historic resources. Or you can go to your local government and request that they use their ability to apply for these funds so that they can come up with a more comprehensive plan that addresses historic resources throughout their jurisdiction. So note that this is not something that you're going to do immediately before a disaster hits or occurs. You need to be thinking about this and doing this, well in advance. When you look at application time period, review, so on and so forth, and then the actual implementation of the grant, this is essentially a 2-year long project. So you need to be able to make that commitment. Currently, our most recent small matching grants, we had over $2 million apply in grants for the program. We had nearly 60 applications. Usually we fund 1.5 million, although in previous years, the legislature has given us extra money and we've been able to fund the full list. Next slide, please. Special category. This is the big grants for when you're actually doing work on the building. And in this case, again, long-term projects, these projects from the award of the grant until its completion is 2 years long. The application is the year previous, again, April 1st through June 1st. When you're applying for these grants, again, contact our office first to make sure that what you're planning to do is even allowable under our grant program. You don't want to submit an application that includes a lot of non-allowables that won't get funded. Another thing that you want to do is that you want to speak with our Architectural Preservation Services staff in our office to make sure that the proposed work, if it is allowable, meets the historic preservation standards. We use the Secretary of the Interior's standards for rehabilitation when we are evaluating all proposed work. So you don't want to propose something that is technically allowable under the requirements of the grant, but which don't meet the preservation standards. I highly recommend that you reach out to groups like the Florida Trust and stuff to find qualified people to do the work, so that you maintain your eligibility for the program throughout the grant. When you're applying, you want to be concrete in terms of your need and your proposed plans. Having specific budgets and numbers are extremely helpful for both staff review and by the Historic Preservation Commission. People like Mr. Gonzalez, who sits on the commission and reviews a lot of these as part of his work with our office. But this is really, a really good program. We do a lot of mitigation projects, so hardening historic resources, making them flood adaptable, like the work on the Bank of the Everglades. That's funded through one of our special category grants. The House of Refuge was through a grant program. We've done work across the state. And then sometimes we receive money after the fact to address impacts by certain disasters. But this, again, is not an immediate assistance program because it takes a year to apply for these. So realistically, if a storm came now, the soonest you'd be able to apply is April 1st for work to start July 1st of 2026. So you need to keep that in mind as well when you're looking to use our grant programs. There are also lots of other grants available through organizations like the Department of Commerce or through the feds, and I encourage you to look at those as well. However, do pay attention if you get funded through one of those grants programs, that again, you're using a qualified contractor or disaster response official who has experience with historic buildings. The last thing that you want to happen is using a grant or other form of financial assistance to do work on a property that results in a negative impact on its historic integrity or its ability to maintain its historic designation. Anyways, we're always happy to help out. Next slide is our contact information in the office. This is my excellent grants staff, our emails, and where we are located. Reach out to us. We are always happy to answer questions and give you, ideas on how to use our grants programs or how to apply. And all of our information is public record, so you can always request any of it, and we would be glad to share it with you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Ruben, and thanks to all your staff. They really are tireless, and I know from my own personal experience, they are very responsive and they do really want to help. So we're very fortunate to have them all there, and thank you for representing them today. So we're going to close out our session today. The first things that I want to do is remind you of the 3 takeaways that we posted in the chat. One is how can you help others? You may not be personally affected, but you may have skills, you may have resources, or as Ruben was alluding to, work with others in your community to see if you can divide and conquer or share resources to better prepare yourselves. The second one was who or where can you get information for damage and recovery options? We've mentioned AIA Florida. We've mentioned Florida Public Archaeology Network, obviously Division of Historical Resources, and the Florida Trust for Historic Preservations. There's also the Florida Association of Museums if you have collections. And the Florida Trust recently completed a preservation toolkit, which is on our website. It goes through a lot of information that's easily digestible, and you don't need any background information. It's written, just so anyone can read and understand it. Our next webinar is going to be scheduled in the new year, and we're going to do another webinar that kind of stays along this theme about how we can preserve documents, photos, and textiles with Rosa Lowinger. So stay tuned.
Thanks.
And now I want to turn it back to you, our listeners, attendees today. We just have a few minutes left, but we have this panel here, and we'd love to answer any of your questions. We hope we can get to them today. Please put them in the chat, and if we don't get to it, we will certainly follow up with an email or include it in a newsletter. Just let us know what types of other information are you looking for. So I'll be happy to open it up to discussion if someone wants to share one immediate action item that you're going to take for your home, museum site, or historic place that you might not have known had you not come today. And if you all would like to turn on your screens, you're welcome to do that. You're welcome to unmute. Any questions? I'm going to go to my questions for the panel. If I don't see someone's hand go up, but feel free to interrupt. We do want to see what we can do for you. One thing that while we have Ruben here, I'd like to ask, and I hope I'm not putting you on the spot, but it's come up so many times in the past several years, is if you change a property to mitigate for future flood damage, is it possible for the property to be immediately de-designated?
So it depends on what is done. I highly recommend that if you're doing any type of flood mitigation on a historic property that is designated, to use the National Park Service's excellent guide on the adaptation of historic properties for floods and high water events, essentially. If you follow that guide, you should be a-okay. The other thing is, though, is that you know, we we are a staff of 3 for the National Register up here in Tallahassee, and we're responsible for the entire state of Florida. And our priority has always been new designations or updating existing designations. While we do de-designations, and we have done them in the past for inappropriate modifications and things like that, it's not necessarily a priority in our office. And we would work with the property owner, you know, to see what was done and how does it impact, you know, a property's designation. It has to be pretty severe, and it depends on why a property is historically significant, right? We're always looking at the why first, and then we look at the how. Because that has a direct impact. You know, a property that is architecturally significant, well, changes to its physical character are more impactful than for a property that is primarily significant for its association with specific events and things like that. So it's a case-by-case basis.
Mhm.
You know, I'm not going to say no, it doesn't impact it, but you know, always contact us. That's always the best thing. Just reach out to us, give us a phone call, send us an email.
Great. I appreciate that, because I know it's sometimes an assumed thing. And we also get wrapped up into, well, does FEMA recognize historic properties? And we're not going to go all into FEMA because there's so much more other materials that will answer those questions. But the answer to that is that, yes, FEMA does recognize historic properties, and that's their whole own process. Another question that I'm going to toss out there to our team of architects, maybe, is there a potential to underestimate the damage from wind? In terms of, you know, people think of shingles blowing off their roofs, but I'm thinking of, you know, securing doors and windows is not just to keep them from breaking. What are some possible scenarios?
So Jenny, I would say, when it comes to hurricane winds, right, all it takes is for one opening to fail, right? So the pressure changes and your house can just, you know, go in different directions, or your building can be seriously damaged. The other concern that I always have is what's not visible, right? JJ mentioned, you know, we do the best we can, right? We walk around, we look for, we might see a crack. Okay, one thing's a hairline crack. One thing's an 1/8 of an inch or a 1/4 inch crack. We start getting very nervous when we start seeing bigger things, but what's not visible, right? And so using these new scanning techniques to look for structural damage and for environmental damage, right? Because we know that mold gets in there really, really quick after a storm. Last week I visited Crystal River, Main Street, and man, those people got it together. Okay, like here's one thing that they do, just to share quickly what they do. The Main Street program coordinator goes down every single shop owner and says, the storm is coming. It's time to get all your goods out of your shop. Go put it in a U-Haul, park it up on high road somewhere, so that when the storm comes through, if your building gets damaged, you know, you haven't lost all your merchandise, right? We all saw how sad what happened in Western North Carolina. How many business people, besides everything else, went out of business. So I thought that was a great idea, you know. They also use metal paneling inside instead of drywall, you know. So you know, there's a lot of good things that we can do, you know, but structure is key, and getting a good structural engineer with a good architect and a contractor to evaluate your property is the first thing you should do.
Thanks, Rick. Melissa, did I see your hand go up?
Yeah, I was being really aggressive about that. I'm sorry. I apologize. I had a question for Mike because I think that we have some folks on the call that are from other historic house museums, and you shared a great story about the work that you've done and lessons you've learned. For those who haven't kind of got that experience yet and don't maybe have a plan in place yet, what would you say is like your first step? What would be the first thing that you would recommend a historic house museum do to get the ball rolling so it's not overwhelming?
I would say look at what the realistic impact of storms in your area could be, because it's going to be different for every historic house museum, every historic site, based on your surroundings, the impacts hurricanes have had in the past. Think about what that worst case scenario would be, and then write it down. Write a plan. Even if you're a small site, even if you're going to be the only person that you think is going to be working to respond to a hurricane, you should have a written plan for a variety of reasons. So I think that would be the first step. Look at what the impacts would be and actually write it down.
Awesome.
Well, thank you all. I'm going to turn it over to Melissa to formally close us out, just to say thanks as our president. And but I do want to wish everyone well for their Thanksgiving week and appreciate you being here. So Melissa, do you have any final words that you'd like to share?
I just wanted to say thank you again to all of our speakers. That was really wonderful information that you shared and a lot of great perspectives. So appreciate you being here this Thanksgiving week, and also for all of those who have listened in today. I appreciate you taking the time during your lunch to learn a little bit. And this will live on our YouTube channel, as Daphne mentioned in the beginning, and we will also share the presentations as well. So this is just kind of the beginning. Don't get overwhelmed. And don't forget about it because hurricane season's almost over. Keep it in the back of your mind. And y'all have a great Thanksgiving. I appreciate you.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks all.
Bye.